This is how the MS-13 and other violent gangs came to America and grew.
Looking back into the 70s and 80s with the MS-13, right? You have an influx of immigrants from El Salvador that came up into the United States after they fled the Civil War in El Salvador. People were killing people left and right. It was just chaos, right? So then you have all these immigrants, they come into the United States and they're kind of isolated away. They're not Mexicans, right? Southern California, Mexican, primarily. They're El Salvadoranians. So they start forming these little groups and they start calling themselves Mara Salvatrucha. So MS-13. So then you have other elements of Central American populations that come to the U.S. as well. But the Mara Salvatrucha, being El Salvadoranian, basically says we're only going to accept mostly Salvadoranians. So the MS-18, the 18th Street guys, they then say, oh, well, we'll take pretty much anyone, right? We'll have a Honduran, we'll have a Mexican, we'll have whatever. I'm oversimplifying this because it would take hours and hours long to explain all this stuff. And then you have, within the prison systems, you have what La M, the Mexican mafia, which runs things within the prison. And then you have groups outside of the prison that kind of answer to what's going on in the prison because, as we talked about, you have people that are going to be in and out of prison their whole life. So at some point, when they go back to prison with the Mexican mafia, they better be loyal to the Mexican mafia because when they get out, they're going back in a year and a half, 2 years later, or even less, right? So then we have this collective of these different street gangs, and then you have mass deportations, which happened back in the late 80s into the 90s, where they're sending people back to El Salvador. Well, in El Salvador, the police at this time were ill-prepared to handle anything, let alone now this new street gang, the MS-13, for example, that's being put back into the country, that's formed a union with each other, where they've become, brothers and sisters, and they come back, and the police are inept in many fashions. Police in Latin America don't have the training, don't have the money, don't have the education, they don't have the programs, they don't have the ability to combat that. And what happened in El Salvador is the gangs grew, and then they started taking over the governments in a sense. They would charge impuestos or taxes on, you name it, they're charging it against store owners, populations of people just to let their kids go to school. They're charging them money. And then you start having modern-day transient movement of gang members into the United States. And the growth of the gangs, the growth of the types of criminal activity they were conducting in prison and outside of prison.